Hey and welcome to the Creative Odyssey podcast, a podcast about entrepreneurship, creativity, and personal growth by me, Emil Ruth. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Hey Seb, how it's going? How are you?
Hey, Emil. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty fine. I just got off the northern German rain. It's pretty cold here. I think it's similar in your hometown as well. And
Yeah, I'm in London, and it's been pretty bad the last week here. I think we're in for a pretty nasty winter actually this year.
yeah, it's probably the similar winds and colds that get in all directions. But anyway, let's get into this. Why don't you just introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Sebastian Lees. I am a software developer, and I've worked for the last 15 years or so through my own consultancy firm, Data Blast. I'm very much interested in, yes, there is the technical aspects of software, but I'm very much interested in what makes good software, how we interact with software, with physical products as human beings, and the lessons that can be learned there. And I'm also interested in the intersection of software design and other areas like behavioral science, tail risk. People who know me or follow me online know I'm a huge fan of Nassim Taleb and concepts like tail risk and anti-fragility. And I like to try and bring different approaches and different ways of thinking into software design in order to build better software. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks you for putting this short. I really like this combination, and I've seen so many Taleb fans here. That might be something onto him. Let's start with the first question. What makes you think software and software design is a field that is so diverse and you can put all your interests together? What makes it so special for you?
So I think from a philosophical level, software is a really interesting art form in that, and I'm stealing a lot of concepts today. Please, I will tell you everyone I'm borrowing from, but Zed Shaw, at the end of his book, Learn Python the Hard Way, talks about how software design, it's only really appeared in the last 50 or 60 years. So it's a really, really new form of a way to express ourselves in human history. But B, it's the only real form of art, form of expression that is two-way, that is bidirectional. You can paint a painting and someone will consume that, or you can film a film and someone will watch it. But with software, we can get this two-way interaction going. So I find that mind-blowing, and I feel so lucky that I've been born in a time within the last 50 years of all of human time span where I've been able to appreciate that. And also a subset of that where I'm one of a small amount of people who's been able to learn how to leverage software to create interactions. So I'm really, really fascinated by it. I always have been since the age of 5. I remember the first day I ever saw a computer, and I'm lucky enough to be one of those people who knew from a very young age what they wanted to do with their lives, which was work with computers, work with software. So it appeals to me from that kind of artistic expression point of view. But also, there's this tweet or this comment that's spread around software is eating the world, right? And it is true. Almost every business to an extent is a software business these days, or has to consider software.
Yeah.
And because it's so new, because it's only 50 years old, we're still navigating this minefield of how do we build good software. A lot of things like architecture that are thousands of years old, right? We discovered the rules, the tenets of good architecture thousands of years ago. Modern architects seem hell-bent in ignoring those and creating horrible buildings, but we discovered the rules. Whereas with software, we're still in that early stage where we're discovering the rules, and that's exciting. That excites me. I love being part of a new field like that.
It's a great way to put it. And we are still on the mission to kind of explore the rules behind it. And it seems to me like software is really like a mirror of human interaction. I mean,
Absolutely.
right now it's pretty two-dimensional when it's like software on a screen, but the future of three-dimensional software is already here. So this might be yet another thing to consider. Um, and I think there is no field where the interaction is as powerful and as much as a part of design as in software. And in traditional design, you design a thing and the consumer uses it in some kind of way. But the ability to change it and to update it, you cannot update a candle. It's if it's
Yeah.
burnt down, it's done. You can make a new one, but you cannot change it while it's being there. And I think that's a pretty cool thing that you have like a almost living object.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this wasn't always the case with software. This is really thanks to the internet more than anything
Yeah.
else. But going back to, I'm older than you, and I do remember the days where if you shipped a piece of software, it would be going out on CD or
Yeah.
floppy disk, and that was it. You if there was a bug in it, you would release an update, but it wasn't the instant kind of updates we have now. And everybody talks about the rise of agile as this a continuous improvement cycle that we see. And agile, I think, is really born out of circumstance. It's born out of the ability of the internet to deliver continuous updates to people. And I
Yeah.
think you're absolutely right about looking in the 3D realm as well. The my personal opinion is that AR, augmented reality, is going to be a huge new paradigm. And we'll talk about how to design software for paradigm shifts later, because that's a really interesting topic that I want to come back to.
Yeah.
And personally, everyone's talking about AI. Everyone was talking about crypto a couple of years ago. And I think there might be red herrings to a certain degree. I think AR is a sleeping giant that's really going to come out in the same way that smartphones totally changed the paradigm of how we interact with phones, but also computers. I think AR is going to go in and totally shift that paradigm again over the next 10 to 15 years. And yeah, absolutely. How we interact with software has been an interesting journey. And if we go back, are you familiar with Douglas Engelbart? He was a visionary from, if listeners can go and Google something called the mother of all demos. And it was a demo by Douglas Engelbart in about I want to say 1969, where he did a live demo of computers. And it is awe-inspiring how far ahead of his time he was, because he is demoing a mouse. He's demoing hyperlinks on documents. He's
Mhm.
demoing file systems, and he's also demoing teleconferencing. He's presenting over a live video feed. All of these technologies were 20, 30, 40 years ahead of the time at that moment. And it's
Yeah.
just a fantastic video to watch. But the way Douglas Engelbart envisaged how we interact with technology was that we would interact with technology in an analog flow state, in the way that humans have for thousands of years, in the way that if we're woodworking or playing an instrument, when we get to a certain level, we get into a flow state and we can just do it without thinking. And what he envisaged was this concept of a violinist who has two hands and is, doing the strings with one and the bow with the other in a beautiful analog flow. And his demo of a computer was very much like that. And he had a mouse in one hand, which he could move about with a flow. And
Mhm.
instead of a keyboard, he had what looks a bit like a stenography device, like in court, how
Mhm.
people would and it's just got 4 or 5 buttons on it, and a combination of chords is how he types. And he envisaged we would interact with computers in this analog, beautiful flow state. Now, that's not what happened in the evolution. We had keyboards, and we're halfway there. Mouse and trackpad and swiping on touchscreen, that's
Yeah.
all analog flow. Keyboards are very much still stop-start and break-off flow. So we didn't quite get to his utopian ideal, but right from the get-go, I think he had an idea of where we should be, and then we've sort of spent the last 50 years trying to get there, and we're slowly getting there.
That's definitely something I need to check out. And even the usage of the keyboards nowadays, it's even sort of like an instrument where you can play it without looking. And the keyboard layout is nothing that is natural to humans. It is learned and pretty adapted quickly. The QWERTY layout, or my German Q words, because the Y and Z is or Z. No, it's Z in UK, right?
Yes, and do you know why we have the QWERTY layout on keyboards? Do you know the history?
I don't really know. I think
So
sometimes.
originally, because it's not a natural pattern of letters, and there are more efficient keyboard layouts, having the most common letters in the easier to reach places.
Yeah.
And it goes back to originally mechanical typewriters used to have more efficient layouts, but people got so quick at typing, but it jammed the mechanical mechanism. So the
Yeah.
QWERTY layout was actually designed to slow typists down a little bit so that it wouldn't jam the mechanical settings. And then computers came along and we inherited it because that already exists. It's Baudelaire would call it a simulacrum. We already have it's already embedded in our society as an image of a representation of how to do something. So computers inherited the typewriter layout. And
Yeah.
it is fascinating.
Yeah, I've seen this simulacron in some other cases, but this is might be more relevant. I think that's some even the shutter noises on iPhone cameras as well. They're not needed. They're just out of just because they were there and they're associated with the camera. Even though most phones will be muted, but that's a great thing. And the other thing that I just remembered when talking about keyboards is the monospace thing that came out of typewriters, that you had to have a specific kind of spacing, so the mechanical movement of the typewriter wasn't jamming into each other. So, but I didn't know the layout was made to slow down the typing person.
It's one of those wonderful examples of paradoxical efficiency, I think. And it's interesting what you were saying about the iPhone and the camera, because this goes back to, I think, what we were talking about a minute ago, which is paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
And again, when smartphones were released, to younger people now, it's hard to overstate just how much of a paradigm shift it was. And if you put someone from 1999 in a time machine and brought them through to the release of the iPhone and said, this is human interaction, right? Make a phone call. They're familiar with mobile phones. So they'd be like, yeah, I'm going to make a call. But they probably wouldn't know how to use it. And this is a really interesting exercise in when we have a paradigm shift, how do we change the needs of people to learn interactive systems? And what Apple did when the iPhone was first released was lean very heavily on the use of pseudomorphs and pseudomorphism. And pseudomorphs, for listeners who don't know, are when you represent through iconography or visual design the functionality of something through an image of something they're already familiar with. And if you go back to the original iPhone and Google it, because everyone thinks, oh, the iPhone hasn't changed that much. It really has. If you go back to the very first iPhone, all of the icons were pseudomorphs of other things. So the camera was a picture of a camera. I think iTunes already was a picture of an old-fashioned radio. The magazines app was a magazine rack with magazines on. And it was to shepherd people into this new paradigm because they weren't familiar with it. And there's hundreds of examples of this on the iPhone. And what happened is, as every new software release came on, as people got more and more familiar, they gradually went more and more abstract, very gradually, with their iconography and with their user interface. Until today, the interface is incredibly abstract. But this
Yep.
gradual shepherding of people into the new paradigm is a wonderful example of human-computer interaction and how to do it right.
I've never seen that before. I noticed the gradual shift to minimalism and abstract designs, but I kind of connected it more as a design choice and generally being more minimalist and functional nowadays and less being about ornaments. I thought it was just more of an aesthetics consideration. I never thought about it that way, that you kind of shepherd the people more into to get to know into the functions. And I remember my dad's first iPhone. So I'm a bit younger, but not that young. So I remember the apps actually looking like the thing. The Notes app did look like a notepad,
Yes,
and nowadays it's just a black or white screen depending on your day or night mode.
I
And I
will say
think, yeah, I've seen
that
even that there's kind of a nostalgia nowadays that people kind of miss the older designs because they felt so human.
absolutely. And please don't get me wrong. There has also been a broad design trend towards minimalism, not just in human-computer interaction, but in logo design. Look, all logos now are flat, two or three colors, and bland. And
Mm,
so fashion and fads are in every aspect of life, just as much as software design as everywhere else. So you are seeing minimalism as a design trend as well as shepherding people. We are seeing a little bit of a reaction now. Everything goes in cycles, right? Fashion goes in cycles. And we are seeing people
yeah,
pushing back now against the blandness of minimal design. And I've seen several logo designs now that have caused outrage online. I will never forgive Oxford University Press for they used to have this beautiful historic logo of the Oxford crest with this beautiful font, cursive font underneath. And they
mm,
changed it into something that looks like a tech startup company, with really boring flat. So people are starting to react, and I'm sure at some point we'll see that shift. We're seeing it shift first, interestingly, in interior design. So interior design went minimal for 20 years, if not
yeah,
longer, more and more minimal, greys and whites and things like that. And now in the UK, at least, we're starting to see much more like floral wallpaper is coming back. And have you heard of this term? People far younger than me are saying it, but cottagecore. And
yeah.
it's the aesthetic of, this wholesome cottage, slightly cluttered, slightly more patterned environment. So, like anything in life, the design trend will flip back. But that being said, when you look at good software, the kind of four tenets of usability, the first one is clarity. So you want things to be clear. If you're going to a website, if you're using a piece of software, you want it to be clear how you use it. And there's this concept in industrial design and software design called affordance. And it's this concept of when you're looking at something, what does it afford you to interact with it? The classic example that's always given is a doorknob, because it is a masterpiece of affordance. You
Yeah.
could be an alien from a foreign planet, and if you landed on Earth and you saw a doorknob, it would intuitively know. You reach out, you grasp it, and you twist it to open the door. And if everything was designed as well as doorknobs, we'd live in a much more different world than what we live in now. And
Yeah.
the converse is this: is something called Norman doors, and these are everyone's encountered this. These are doors where normally in office buildings where you go up to a door and it's got a flat handle and you don't know whether you push or pull it because the
Yeah.
door doesn't afford you the information and you do it the wrong way round Like it has a hand, and you push it when you should be pulling it, and it clangs, and then you pull it. And these are called Norman doors after the author Norman, who wrote The Design of Everyday Things, an incredible book. Even if you're not into software design, if you're an entrepreneur, if you are a manager, if you are in any way creative, you should read The Design of Everyday Things because it is an absolutely groundbreaking book. And Norman doors are named after the author. And affordance, again, going back to the toaster analogy, the toaster affords you 2 slots to put bread in and a thing you push down. It's so intuitive. So this goes back to a slightly wider concept as well. And if I was to give one tip, if you were to say to me, Seb, what makes good software? Which is a huge question.
Yep.
But I would always talk about the gulf of evaluation versus the gulf of execution. And again, this applies to far more than software. So let me give you a parable. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you are walking through the desert and you come across a chasm. Now, let's say that chasm is 2 foot wide. And I said to you, how do you cross this chasm? So your gulf of evaluation would be easy. I just step over it. It's really thin. I can just step over it. And the gulf of execution, actually doing it, is really easy. I just step over it. If I said to you that chasm is 4 or 5 feet wide, your gulf of evaluation might be, well, I think I can probably jump over this if I do a running jump. And you would take a little bit longer to think about that because you don't want to fall down. But yeah, I'm pretty confident. And again, the execution, you have to do it yourself a little bit, but you can do it pretty intuitively. Now, if I said to you that chasm is 50 foot wide or 100 foot wide, how do you cross it? You're going to have to spend a lot of time thinking about how do I build a bridge or an aircraft or something. And then executing that similarly, it's incredibly complicated to execute that. And this is the same thing. Every product we use in life, whether it's digital or physical, we have to think about the gulf of execution. What do I want to achieve? What do I want to do? Versus the gulf of evaluation. How long is it going to take me to figure out how to do that? When we design software, we should be designing it to make those gulfs as narrow as possible for users to understand and to use. And I think one place we're going backwards here is car design, with this trend of touchscreen. Getting rid of all physical knobs and switches, because previously the gulf of execution was very small on these. If we're driving along, we can just reach out. We can tactilely feel what we have to do, and we learn the knob, and it does not distract us from driving. These touch screens, there's no tactile feedback. You have to look down and do it, and you have to distract yourself on the road. So I feel from a design point of view, we've gone backwards here, at the sake of being shiny and Apple-like, and we're sacrificing, we're widening the gulf of execution, to make things look nice. So what makes good software? A very narrow gulf of evaluation and execution.
That's a pretty good example that I've just noticed a few days ago, where it's actually the climate control of a car. Either way you're driving, you have no time to evaluate how to do it. You just feel it's either way too cold to drive or it's way too hot. You don't have time to even find the slider to change the temperature, and you just leave it. And I think a knob is something that's pretty easy to understand, so you don't have a low barrier to find and get to understand it, and just to turn it, or knobs that you can press.
The gold standard with climate control knobs, and I'm a very sad person, so I know this, is Bentley cars. Every automotive manufacturer should copy their climate control. So they have a knob in the middle, a universal knob, which is tactile. But what the software does is for every setting that you're using this knob for, the range of the knob changes. So if I'm going from very cold to very hot, that might be half a turn. And then I can't turn it anymore. I know I'm at maximum. But
Yeah.
if I'm adjusting the volume on the stereo to make it louder, that might be 3/4 of a turn. So automatically change where the knob stops. There must be a motor or a servo behind it. And it is wonderful because without looking at anything, you know where the maximum and minimum is. And it's a beautiful piece of well, a combination of software and hardware. And it is beautiful in its affordance and beautiful in narrowing the gulf of execution.
That definitely goes into the range of UI and UX design. If you might find this keyword interesting, I was just
Absolutely.
yeah.
And in the I think it was I think it was the 80s where the design of everyday things was written. Don't hold me to that. And Norman doors were given as the example everyone will be familiar with. These horrible doors. I think if it was written today, we might talk about USB plugs because
Yeah.
they are some of the worst piece of design of the last 30 years. Everybody has had this experience where they get a USB A, by the way,
Yeah.
the thick one. They plug it in, it doesn't fit, nothing. They turn it upside down, it still doesn't fit. So then they turn it back to the first where it was in the first place, and suddenly it works. And I cannot fathom how the people who designed that standard did not design it to work whichever way round you plug it in. And they have
Yeah.
finally fixed that on USB-C after 15, 20 years. But that is an absolute failure of affordance and design and human industrial
Yeah.
design interaction.
And it did take so much time. And it was probably completely unnecessary because they were already, and there are countless types of cables that you can just plug in any kind of way. And coming from like an audio background, there were so many standards you could have probably used before. And I'm thankful for USB-C, and I'm kind of bugged out if I see any kind of device that's, I don't know why, micro USB is still bugging me out as well because it's so flimsy and small. And funnily, my microphone here has an USB into my MacBook, but a micro USB into the microphone, and it's so inconvenient to figure out which side I need to put where. And this is the cost of the execution you were talking about. If it were the cable with the same side and the same way, I don't need to guess in any second in which turn I need to put which cable. And I see this really comes into place when you're talking about everyday things because it's bugging me out on a probably daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds trivial, we're sat here talking about cables, and it does
Yeah.
sound trivial, but these little pain points, these micro annoyances in everyday life, and they do add up and they have a huge impact. And, the reason, in my opinion, why Apple was so successful is because they paid attention to stuff like this. They weren't the most technologically advanced company in the world. They weren't innovating in terms of technology. Quite often, they introduce things several years behind their competitors. In terms of, the iPhone was not the first smartphone. But what they do is they look at paradigm shifts, they look at new technology, and then they spend time thinking about all these little human-computer interactions, all these software things, and that's why Apple is so great. I can't remember if they're still the most valuable company in the world or Nvidia has overtaken them, but that is why they are where they are, in my opinion, because they pay attention. And things like the USB, this is a classic case of you've got a lot of geeks in the room who are incredibly intelligent in one way, incredibly intelligent software developers, incredibly intelligent engineers, but they're missing this intersection of human design. And that's why I like to think about. And it's everywhere.
Yeah, I just recently have seen the book recommendation of one of the former designers for Apple. I don't know his name, but kind of the predecessor of Jony Ive. And I mean, all of them got their inspiration from Dieter Rams at Brown, but still the aesthetic, and and it's a familiar kind of design language that just got developed over time. And one thing about Apple that I learned and kind of accepted as one of their standout rules is that they did not make design an optional thing or something you do it after the product or after the software is done. The design aspect is even in the center of the whole thing, and not just something. Okay, now we do have a product. Now we can ship it to the design company, and they put some fancy buttons over here, and also the whole design aesthetic of less but better that was framed by Dieter Rams. And they're just leaving things out that you do not need that make it harder for you to do the thing and more overwhelming. And yeah.
It's absolutely on point, and for a lot of consumer stuff, it's absolutely true. I'm going to add a note of caution to what I'm saying here, because when designing software, and again, apply this to other areas, but some users, some customers want complexity.
Yeah.
And so this trend of like Appleification of everything shiny and minimalist and sleek can backfire on you. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. So, British Airways a while back introduced. They were looking at their check-in desks at airport when you go in and weigh your bag and give them your ticket or whatever. And the systems were very, very old. They're black and white, command line, text prompt, screen.
Yep.
So someone came and said, no, these need to be shiny and interactive and mouse and easy to use. This is too complicated. What they didn't take into account is that for expert users, this kind of interface is a wonderful thing because it allows them to be incredibly efficient once they've learnt the keyboard shortcuts. They can play this thing like a piano.
Yeah.
What they found once they implemented it is, yes, it reduces the time for training for new people on these desks, but it doubled the wait time for people checking in, and therefore it doubled the length of the queue when people are waiting to check in. Because before, previously, you could be like rat-a-tat-tat, done. You are now, click, yes, next. So there is a downside. You do have to think about the complexity level of your users. And again, anyone who works in finance who's listening to this will intuitively understand this if you've ever used a Bloomberg terminal in finance, which look very old-fashioned and archaic. But to traders, to investment managers who use it, they have memorized the shortcuts. They know everything. They can bring up any piece of information complicated within a few seconds. So there is that consideration. Now, the best software offers both. And look at Windows and look at Mac OS. They have a graphical user interface where you can, point and click files, skeuomorphism. A file looks like a paper file.
Yeah.
But you can open up the command line and you can be a power user and do some really incredibly efficient stuff on the command line. So it allows you the best software allows you to pick your level of complexity. So there's that to consider as well.
I haven't thought about this that way. I usually think about if talking about user experience or the interface who does contribute to a better experience in using software would almost always include some kind of simplification or streamlining and a better graphic background. But maybe I'm just talking about my own view, how I use software. And when I think back when I started producing music, I really got better along with software that looked a lot more streamlined, like Apple's Logic Pro did, and kind of ditched everything that looks like a command machine of an aircraft, because that wouldn't feel like play, wouldn't feel like producing music, or because I don't need to have 500 different knobs. I mean, in some
Yes.
cases, it is important. I just recently learned that it might sound off topic, but in aircrafts, like in airplanes, there the countless different levers and top knobs and buttons are actually important for for the pilots. And even in the case of emergency, they go through an like sequence of buttons and things they need to push, because neurologically they have these kind of wait time to imply that they don't get into a panic. And that
Yes.
was mind-boggling to have some buttons and like a routine you need to check, and need to check this kind of status
Yeah.
and pull this down and do this. And after you've done all of this, you can make a radical decision if needed to.
Yeah. It's a wonderful example. That is a perfect example. And this kind of complexity, experts sometimes want complexity, and it goes back to the flow state we talked about, playing it like a violin and being able to get into a flow. That checklist, that is almost like a form of meditation to get you into a flow state so that you
Yep.
can make decisions under stress. And they did. If your listeners Google the Boeing 737 Max cockpit, about 10 years ago, when they released a new version of the 737 Max, they tried to get rid of a load of these knobs and
Mm.
bring it and just like and it was disastrous. And I think they've actually, again, we talked about it in cars, but it was really disastrous. So um, absolutely, it's a really, really valid example. So there is this juxtaposition, and in terms of usability, the golden rules are: we want clarity in terms of affordance, but clarity can mean minimalist, or it can mean tactile response as an expert user. We want ease of use. We want navigatability. We want to be able to navigate it easily. And we want it to be accessible for everyone, from beginners to experts. So, either I use my mouse or I learn all the keyboard shortcuts and do it as an expert. There's this wonderful concept for accessibility, talking about disability, of the curb effect. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but the curb effect states that if we make something accessible for disabled users, it actually makes it better for everyone. It's
Mm.
this kind of unintended consequence.
Yeah.
And the physical example is, if you build a ramp, it has all sorts for wheelchair users, people with pushchairs and young children, people who might have arthritis, delivery drivers who have to unload something. So, and it's named after obviously a curb, the ramp on a curb. So
Mm.
we have all of these wonderful heuristics we can use. So I'm not discounting minimalism. Absolutely, things have to be clear. And you will be too young to remember this, but for older listeners who remember Microsoft Office before the ribbon, this is a wonderful case study in how not to shepherd your users. So we talked about the iPhone earlier, how they slowly changed the icons. So
Yeah.
Microsoft Word grew over the years, and it got more and more complicated, and more icons were at the top. And it became a mess. It became too complicated. A little bit all the knobs on the dashboard or the knobs on the sound mixer. And the average user was overwhelmed when they were beginning. So Microsoft said, okay, we're going to design this ribbon, which probably what you're familiar with and what you've always known. But this ribbon
Mm.
design that all Microsoft Office suites use today. But rather than shepherding their users from one to the other, they just had a new release and go, here's a ribbon. And they just introduced a new paradigm without any intermediate. And it was a disaster. People hated it. There was a huge, huge public reaction against it. To be fair to Microsoft, they stuck by their guns because they knew it was better. And they said, no, give it time, give it time. And eventually people got used to it and now they love it. And so, yeah, this kind of growth of complexity and unbunching, this concept in design of expansion and contraction. Things expand, and then we have to contract into a new paradigm that's simpler, and that will expand and contract. So we go
Mm.
through this series of expansion and contraction as software gets more complicated and as products evolve.
That's a great thing to consider, that you have these cycles, and every time something seems too complex, there might be a paradigm shift coming. And the thing you said about the accessibility of the interaction reminds me of a learning I've made when, maybe even though it's a bit cheesy, but it's coming from Atomic Habits. And I don't want to get into the whole thing, but one thing that struck out is when introducing a habit or a wanted behavior, we need to reduce the friction in order to do it. Like
Absolutely.
packing your gym stuff and putting it right next to your door, so you just get out and you don't have to get everything and kind of convince yourself. And in some other
Absolutely.
cases, when you want to reduce to do a certain bad behavior, you need to introduce friction and make it harder to get to the shelf with the sweets and make it the highest thing in your cupboard if you have any and still at your home, or don't have any at home and being forced to go outside to get some snack. And it's
Yeah,
kind of a heuristic I then had in my mind when I want something to do. I made it easier, and I don't want to do something. I need to make it harder in simpler terms.
absolutely. It's really important reducing friction in software design. If there are any startup entrepreneurs listening to this, reduce the friction in your software. And it becomes more important with scale. Don't worry about it while you're building, an MVP, but once you get traction, start worrying about it. And there's a wonderful case study. The e-commerce companies are really onto this, and they're perhaps the best case studies to Google. Tesco, a big supermarket chain in the UK, there's a brilliant case study where just by moving the checkout button a quarter of an inch higher on the screen, it increased online sales by £70 million per annum just by reducing friction. It's
Yeah.
incredible. There's so much in this topic, but on a broader level, I would say related to reducing friction. If people have too much friction, they'll never even get to your product. If you have too much friction on your website, on your startup. So think about information scent theory. This is another really important concept for software designers and entrepreneurs. Information scent theory refers to, think of an animal like foraging for food, a fox or a pig,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of, they sniff it and they follow it and they kind of follow this path. And it refers to the concept that if a user thinks they can predict they will get to where they want to get to on your software, they will stick with it longer. If they think they can find a path, they will stick
Yeah.
with it. So if you go onto, Amazon and you want to buy, a book, but a specific book, you pretty much know the first thing you hit is a huge search box. The information site. I'm pretty confident that I can smell out if I search for it, it's going to come up.
Yeah.
Going back to the old days of the internet, it doesn't have to be a search box. Yahoo, before Google, before it was a
Mm-hmm.
search engine, it was a search directory. And they were brilliant at information scent theory because they created this amazing nested directory of, okay, I want to find the football scores for my local team. Okay, well, I know that if I click on sports, the next page will likely be, and then I'll click on football after that. I can sniff out the path intuitively. So
Mm-hmm.
think about that and how it relates to customer conversion, because people will just get bored and close down your website unless it doesn't have to be too simple, but users have to think they can sniff out a path to get what they want.
That's a great point. And this kind of you need to introduce a path. I see this especially in e-commerce, and most of the examples you have been just saying are popping up in my mind as soon as you finish to introduce them. And you always see like a line with a few dots, and you know that there's like 4 steps until you get there,
Mm-hmm.
and you probably wouldn't buy more or quicker if that wasn't the case, or if you're unsure how many steps there are. And the most annoying case is if any of these steps is taking too much time, buffer time,
Yeah.
loading time, This is a huge factor, and it could be just half of a second or a few seconds. If it's not loading, they just close down the tab or the website or whatever.
Absolutely. It's even thinner than that. Google did a study where they analysed hundreds of millions of the user interactions, and it was as small as for every tenth of a second of extra loading time, user throughput completion of the journey goes down something like 5 or 10% for every time. It's incredible. I imagine it's non-linear in the same way that irritation towards bugs are non-linear. So, the first bug you encounter is going to be met by mild annoyance as a user. The second bug or third bug you encounter, you're going to be absolutely enraged. So, the first quarter of a second you have to wait for load, you're going to be like, the next quarter of a second it's going to drop off sharply. So, be aware of that, absolutely.
Yeah. It's part of because humans got more impatient because everything works out so quickly. And I'm still old enough to remember a time where the internet wasn't like an instant fountain of information that was popping up the same moment that is noticeable for our human eyes as soon as we get there. And I still find myself being very impatient when any kind of software isn't working out instantly. And this introduces so much risk if you're building something. And that's actually the next thing I want to kind of try to transition here smoothly and talking about risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So risk in software is multifaceted. It depends on what you're building. It can be minor, if the if if the website crashes, it's mild annoyance. Through to major, if your autopilot fails on your plane, it's going to crash and kill people. So your attitude to risk obviously depends on the context of the software you're developing, but also economic. We talked about loading times affecting users, and I will say there's a behavioral science element to this. You don't necessarily always have to make the wait times as short as possible. Just work with the psychology of the user. And the spinning icon, again, it sounds to younger people, this sounds so trivial, but a spinning icon lets you know that a website is loading. But there was a time where that did not exist, and the frustration of not knowing whether the website has crashed versus, oh no, I've got a visual indicator it's loading. It was a huge innovation. It sounds ridiculous now, but it didn't necessarily make it load any quicker, but it alleviated the frustration that users feel.
Yeah.
But risk in software is really important. So let me give you a couple of examples of things going badly wrong. So there's so many of these. Let me try and pick a nice, entertaining one. So Knight Capital. So Knight Capital was a Wall Street investment fund, one of the biggest trading houses, and they in 2012, I think it was August 2012, they were working on some new software for high frequency trading. And for users unfamiliar, high frequency trading is when you programmatically use software to control your trades to try and get an advantage in the market by being quicker. And these trades execute, at hundredths of a second, thousandths of a second. And they built this new trading system. And what they did is inadvertently introduced a bug where they turned off a flag for a dormant piece of software. And this software had been turned off for 10 years, and people have forgot about it. And so this new software, all it did was just delete that flag, which stopped the software from activating. They went live, when the markets opened, 9:30 a.m. New York time, whatever. This dormant system, which was called PowerPeg, suddenly came to life after all these years. Nobody in the organization really had any historical knowledge of it, and it caused the trading system to go haywire. And what actually happened is within 45 minutes, they'd lost $414 million through these crazy trades that this dormant system was executing. And the next day, Knight Capital went bankrupt. So that's an example of how one bug can destroy a company. And it's also a prime example of this concept of Chesterton's fence, which is not really software. You can apply it to software, but you can apply it to so many other areas. And this concept of Chesterton's fence, I think it's from a film, originally from a film, that you should never destroy a fence, or taking the analogy further, never take down a fence or change a rule or do away with a tradition until you fully understand why that fence was built in the first place. So this kind of removing the fence that stopped PowerPeg, they were like, oh yeah, that's fine. Unless you fully understand in complex systems why something is there, don't remove it. And that applies to traditions in society that have been passed down for thousands of years. It's so applicable. So the two lessons here are, in a complex system, be careful what you change. But also, 45 minutes is a lifetime in software development. How was this allowed to run for 45 minutes before it was shut down? So that's a concept of tail risk in action, and a related concept of anti-fragility, which is another of Nassim Taleb's great ideas. And again, for listeners, I know you have a lot of Taleb fans on this podcast, but the concept of anti-fragility is that most people think that you have fragile at one end of the spectrum, and people will say, what is the opposite of fragile? And people will say, well, it's robustness. And Taleb's great idea was to say, no, that's a middle, that's a neutral. Robust is neutral. Anti-fragile is the opposite of fragile. And that is when things get stronger from chaos, from disorganization. And there aren't that many that I found, there aren't that many concepts of anti-fragility or using that concept in software development. But one of the few I have found which is brilliant is Netflix. And Netflix built this thing called a chaos monkey. And it is an internal piece of software that is designed to randomly go through their system like a crazy monkey. And it randomly turns off systems. It randomly creates bugs. It just randomly causes outages. And the idea is that, as software developers, you can think, you can account, you can make it robust, you can write tests, you can manually test. But the chaos monkey will destroy things at random and then make your system overall stronger, because you will then write software where things can go down, parts of the system can go down, and it continues. So again, if your listeners Google chaos monkey, it's an absolutely brilliant innovation by Netflix applying this concept of reducing tail risk. And again, one more, the final example I'll give, we could talk about it more, but actual real world examples, a much more tragic example, is the Patriot missile system failure. So this was, again, a long time ago, about early 90s, I think 1991, but early 90s during the Gulf War. The American Patriot missile system in Dhahran, in the American military base in Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. It was designed to track incoming Scud missiles and shoot them down. And there was a software update for this. And I won't go into the technical details, but essentially, the software update was released where it caused a timing fault. And the timing fault meant that it didn't interact with the missiles properly. And the next day, Scud missiles hit the base and killed, I think it was something like 23 soldiers. And a really, really poignant example. And this is an example of tail risk in what Taleb calls extremist stand environments, because the timing issue that was introduced in the bug, we're talking thousands, millionths of a second. And in ordinary world, in the human ordinary world, it wouldn't matter and we don't notice it. But because Scud missiles travel at 1,600 kilometers a second, even a thousandth of a second matters when calculating those vectors. So this kind of extreme environment causes tail risk bugs. So two examples of where software, it's not just your favorite game crashing or losing a little bit of data, it has real world implications. So I'm fascinated by places like Netflix, who I consider innovators in thinking about anti-fragility, thinking about robustness, and creating things like Chaos Monkey. And I feel like more organizations should be taking a lead from them.
great for putting this, and especially setting up anything that's anti-fragile that requires to think counterintuitively. So you might want to build something as robust as possible, but you mostly don't recognize the risk of it's something that is robust is just being less susceptible to chaos and to destruction, but not profiting off of it. I've never seen or heard about this chaos monkey theory, but it seems to me like a crazy thing to do if you think intuitively. But when you think about testing and installing bugs and stuff like that to make sure your systems are running well and not like the old Christmas light bulbs, when one crashes, the whole thing is broken down, that you have some autonomous parts and working. Is there any kind of way that you use this concept of anti-fragility in your everyday life, like as a way of thinking?
Well, there was a tweet that went out a few days ago from a friend of mine. I think it really changed how I think about anti-fragility a little bit. And again, based off Taleb's writing, but we talk about how complex systems society life. Software systems, as we get more and more integrated into the cloud and speak to each other via the internet, the global financial system, all of these complex systems, when they are black boxes, essentially, and the big failure is when we try to think we know the black boxes and draw a straight line across them. So the great shift in thinking for me is that we cannot predict what's going to happen in these complex systems. We can only position ourselves within them so that we either benefit from them or are not damaged from them. We're not taking up the game. This concept of ergodicity, right? So the most important thing is to stay in the game. It's fine to suffer losses. It's fine to suffer damage as long as that damage doesn't kill you or wipe you out so that you can no longer play the game, as in bankrupt you financially or something like that. So, the concept of insurance, and it's a concept of don't try and second guess it. Just try and understand that once the system shifts, just try and position yourself so that you're not wiped out if the worst happens. And certainly in software, I speak out about this, but I'm not a fan of the shift to the cloud because I think the cloud is one of these things that looks like we're being anti-fragile, looks like we're being robust, but we're not. And people are saying, oh, we'll shift our website, we'll shift our software onto the cloud. And they have all of these redundant systems where if something crashes, they start a new one, and that's wonderful. No. All you're doing is shifting your risk into the long tail event. So yes, in the short term, you're making it more robust. You're making it more resilient. But by putting everything within Amazon Web Services or within Microsoft, when you have global outages, everything in the system crashes. And a great example of this is, the security software from a few months back where all the airlines across the world were grounded. I can't remember the name of the company now, but they released a security fix over the air. And because so many major companies across the world had introduced this security software to make them more robust, but because it's all centrally controlled, when that centrally controlled software went down, half of the Western world went down for 24 hours. All major flights were grounded across the Western world. Online banking stopped working. It was a huge mess up. So we can fool ourselves sometimes, I think, into thinking we're being more resilient when actually we're increasing the risk of a catastrophic event affecting us. This concept of picking pennies up in front of a steamroller. We think we're doing the right thing, but we'll get flattened eventually. So in software design, I think about things like that and being slightly anti-cloud. And in everyday life, I just think about positioning myself to avoid ruin if the system changes suddenly.
And to not just do the first thing that comes into mind and doing the next secure option that might just be a huge risk, as I've seen in like traditional career or putting everything all in one card in one specific way of succeeding in life and risking essentially while thinking you're doing something that is robust, but it might not be. And there's probably countless different examples. And as one last little thing, is there anything else you might want to add or give our listeners to think about it like a think piece until we kind of close this session?
I suppose just to kind of give a few general heuristics around good design and good software development. I'm a huge fan of heuristics. Again, something I've learned from Taleb, that to me, heuristics have this amazing compression ratio of knowledge and wisdom, and that they can compress huge amounts of wisdom into, a sentence or two. So I've tried over the years to develop some of my own software development heuristics and aphorisms. I suppose a few of them to close off. The more a developer is obsessed with displaying deep knowledge, deep technical knowledge of a programming language or a code, I find the less likely they are to be a good developer and write good software from a human point of view. If you're building software or if you're an entrepreneur building a software business, do not over-optimize your product unless that product is already extremely mature. And even then, don't over-optimize your product. I think as well, all people need to learn the very basics of good user interface and user experience. Doesn't matter if you're not a software developer, doesn't matter if you're not a designer. If whatever you are doing in life, you need to learn the basics of good human-computer interaction, good UI design. Two more, I think, maybe to cross off. We've already touched on this, but a steep learning curve is not necessarily a bad thing if it allows expert users to get things done quickly. And let me think, I've got a few more. Let me think of one more that might be a nice one to wrap it up. Maybe someone that's a little bit more opaque. Okay. So UX is the art. At its core, what I do is the art of misdirection. It's about putting things in curtains over the top of complex things. And beautiful software will misdirect beautifully. And that's what we should be aiming for.
Thank you so much for taking the time. It was a great pleasure and so many things that I have learned. And I'm definitely open for another round in the near future.
Anytime. And thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed listening to my podcast, you can show support by following me and hit the bell to never miss out on my latest content. I'd appreciate a positive review too. You can find more of my content on www.emildroot.com. Thanks and bye for now.